I'm Don Morris, you're watching Boss and Dan Bushcraft. Today, I don't know why that makes me laugh so much, just sliding out from behind the van, I don't know what that's about. But today, we're going to be taking a look at yet another paraffin appliance. And this little beauty is the Swedish-made Optimus number 45. I don't know if they actually did make 45 different types of stoves. I haven't got that far yet with research and things. As with these sorts of things, there is a vast and varied history and a lot to learn. This little beauty is actually the mainstay of the kitchen here and gets used every single day without fail. It boils kettles, it cooks, it does all manner of things for us here, and it's in pretty much constant use, this beautiful little thing, and it lights very similarly to a lot of other lamps and stuff like that, the Tillys and stuff. You have to prime it first with methylated spirits or something else to that akin, something that burns really clear, alcohol, you know, stuff like that. But this little beauty, and the reason why it is in the garage with me today, is behaving a little bit weird. It is starting to yellow flame a little bit and cough and sneeze and all of that sort of stuff, which is why it's in here. And what we're going to be doing basically is some routine maintenance, which with these routine maintenance is basically cleaning, really, more than anything, keeping certain areas of them so they're not grubby and getting carbon off stuff and things like that. It's about all they really need, to be honest with you. A biggie with things like this, however, is going to be the fuel tank. Yeah, more importantly, what's going on inside of that fuel tank, because when you've got appliances like this that are so reliable, vitamin coffee. Put that back on the Vector, keep it toasty. When you've got things like this that are so reliable and dependable and just work consistently so well, nobody bothers with them really. Nobody does anything with them. They just use them, and then when you start getting a problem, you're like, oh, there's something wrong with it. That something is pretty much always going to come down to just a couple of factors. It is either going to be that it's dirty, it's got carbon in places where you don't want it, or the number one culprit of all things with these is fuel tank contamination, things getting in there with the fuels. Now, even though obviously the manufacture of fuels is a very modern process, and I imagine they do their level best to keep the fuels that are made incredibly clean, some contaminants will always get in there. Now, how old this thing is exactly, I do not know. What I do know is it's probably been with us now for 30 years or more. It has always been around, and it spent a massively long length of time sat around basically as an ornament with just an old kettle on the top of it. It always worked, but because of that, of how old they are, if you think you've been pouring fuel into this thing, and other people have, for God only knows how many years, we don't filter the fuel as it goes into these things, we just pour it in neat. Now, everything gets contaminated a little bit over time. It could be dust getting into your storage tank, anything like that. It is most often water and other such things that don't mix or burn. They cause quite a lot of problems, yeah. So a tank flush is a good thing to do with anything like this, and it's something that very rarely happens with things like this. Now, it would be a nice thought to think that fuel is always clean and always perfect. It isn't. It's the very reason why your car will have a fuel filter on it. Diesel filters and things like that have to be changed regularly, because there can be contaminants in there that you don't want going through the sensitive components of your engine. Sensitive components being particularly on modern vehicles, injectors. They do not like having little grubby bits going through them. Now, this thing has a teeny weeny little valve down there that sprays the kerosene or paraffin out of it underneath that thing. Call it what you like, it's a distributor, vaporizer, whatever. But when that is hot from priming, that fuel hits the top of there, turns to a gas and burns out of these little holes. All of these are places where clogs happen, grub gets, causes issue. And the number one reason for these not working particularly well is that little tiny thing in there. It just looks like a little grease nipple or something poking up. It is in fact the valve. Tiny, tiny little hole in the middle of there. You do get special little wire tools to poke it free if they do get clogged. But anything that gets sucked up the tank, blocks that up, causes an issue. So what we're going to do, clean this puppy up, check what's going on inside of it, and just generally. Now the best thing about things like this, and if you've been watching these videos, then you've seen by now one of the best things about these things is simplicity. They are so simple, there really isn't much to go wrong with them. So the first thing I want to know is, what sort of fuel have we got in there? Now I know it's currently kerosene. What I mean is what's the state of the fuel that is in there? So what I'm going to do is pour it straight out. And just have a look at what condition it's in, what comes out with it. Is there anything nasty in it? Oh yeah, there's something in there. Oh, delightful. Now this dirty old kerosene, I'm not going to tip it away. What I'm going to do with it is throw it in this Valvector at the back on my paraffin heaters. I really don't care at the moment if that tank gets contaminated with stuff, because that runs on a wick. I did say, yeah, your wicks can clog, but that one is, your wicks don't clog anywhere near as easy as the little fine things on this, but that one's actually coming up for a wick change anyway. I have with the Valvectors, I'll show you this when I show the vectors, you can actually, when the wick runs out, you can actually they're sort of riveted together, and you can get a bit more life out of them. I've done that with that 2 or 3 times. It is ready for a new wick that I have several of lying around. So I'll pour all this old junk into the Valvector. That'll burn this off and make good use of it. And then when I do change the wick on that, I'm going to give that a full tank flush as well, so it's clean tank, clean wick, and not a problem. Right. And that tank is completely empty. Lovely stuff. Blech. Now then, what do we have in here? Things. Stuff and things. I don't know if you can see in that. If the light is, I'll probably put the light behind it for a minute to give you a better chance of seeing it. Doesn't appear to be water or liquid ingress in this fuel, but what there is actually in there is a lot of dust, particles, some fluffy looking stuff. Don't know what that is, and what looks possibly like it is a piece of glass. Okay. Also, you can just see, I don't know if you guys can see through the plastic jug, but you can just see there's all manner of stuff floating in it. It kind of looks a bit cloudy, and that's not what you want with this sort of appliance. You want it as clear as it can possibly be. But this happens, and this is why you have to flush them every so often. Realistically, we're not filtering it as we're filling that thing up. It's too much faffiness. It's easier to just give it a good tank flush every now and then. That is full of, I knew it was going to be not great, but yeah, like there's grass in the bottom of that. Anywho, so let's pour that in the Valvector, get rid of it, and then get this tank flushed out and make it nice and clean. So I've put all the tank caps and everything back on just so nothing else can fall in there in the meantime. But, oh yeah. Before I start slushing that tank out and cleaning that up, I'm going to get rid of all the dusty bits, the grubby bits that I want to clean off before. That way, when I do come to sluice that tank out, there isn't bits of stuff firing around everywhere. In the priming pan here, I have actually got a load of paraffin that's gone in there from where I've tipped it upside down and shook it a minute ago. I need to get rid of that. I want that dry in there before I start cleaning it up. So I'm just going to chuck some isopropyl in it and prime it in the same fashion as if I was going to light it. And that'll just burn off all the kerosene that's got in there and make it clean, basically, and dry, so I can get in there with the tool and flick all the dust out. Because that does have the actual kerosene in there, it may smoke a little bit, so particularly when you are, if you were say using this indoors, if you have had that issue, then dry it out before you prime it, because you can see exactly what's happening here. Because I've shook it and tipped it up, it's got the fuel in the pickup tube basically, and it's going to pull that through and yellow flame and basically make a big mess. It doesn't usually behave like that at all. It's just because I'm faffing about with it basically. It's done that. And always, whilst you are priming for lighting later on, I'll show you the lighting thing later on, but there's your little air release valve. When you're priming it, keep that open. If there is enough fuel in the tank, when you're priming it, the fuel heats up and it'll push it up the tube and it'll start weeping out of there and behaving like this, because basically the kerosene isn't hot enough to burn clean yet. That's what the priming's about. You've got to get it hot enough so that that does burn properly and how it's supposed to. So you don't really close your air valve until the last minute of lighting it, otherwise it starts weeping. So what I'm going to clean it with, I'm going to start off with a little wire brush on this little tool. This one's a Black & Decker RT650, it says proudly on it. It's basically a Dremel, a copy of one of those other little there's billions of them out there, doesn't matter which one. What does matter, however, is a lot of the components on these things are brass or otherwise metals, not steel. The little wire brush attachment I've got on that is a brass one, not a steel one. And for anyone that doesn't know the reasons why brass ones and things like that exist, they're softer, they're not going to do as much damage. If you take a steel one to this and you go a little too far, you might damage it. You might make the holes a little bit bigger than they're supposed to be with it, and that's not what you want, or you're going to thin that metal down with it. Yeah, so do pay attention to stuff like that. Steel is quite a hard metal. It's not the hardest, but it is a lot harder and not as soft as things like brass and bronze and what other materials you might find. Like if you was to take a steel brush head like that and take it to a piece of alloy, normal sort of aluminium, you would leave lines in it that you're not going to get out. Basically, you damage it. So use the right thing for it, brass on brass, and that'll be it. And I'm just going to clean around there and get all the grub out and hopefully clean these little holes up. Now, you don't need to go absolutely mad at it. I'm not trying to make it shine. I'm just trying to get all the dust and scale and carbon off it. Just going to do the outside now. So you can see how it's cleaned up quite a bit already. A few shiny bits where I've overdone it. It's not damaged the metal, it's just taken the burnt on sootiness off it. I don't really need to clean the whole top of the dome, to be honest with you, just where the holes are. And I'll probably give that a good blast of air from the compressor as well, just to make sure everything's sort of gone out of there. As far as this piece goes, yes, you could polish it and make it beautiful brass and shiny. There really is no point. After you've used it twice, that would be back to that sort of colour again. So, and there's no point going mad thinning your metal out by polishing the living bejesus out of it. I just want all that cloudy nonsense gone. And then there's this little distributor piece that lives underneath that. And again, you can see it's a bit grubby inside. Now, this is steel, so I can go as hard as I want on this with the brass brush. Not going to do any harm. But again, get it clean and it'll work a lot better. Tell a lie, I thought that was steel because it looks as if it's rusty. That's not rust. There's layers of carbon. It is in fact brass underneath there. So gentle with it. Right, so that is what I would call functionally clean. I've cleaned up all the spaces where vapors and things are supposed to move and airflow moves. I'm not going to make it shine. There really is no point. As soon as you start using the thing again, it'll just get dirty again. There's no point polishing it unless you are planning on using the thing as an ornament, which I am not. It is used daily to do what it is. Lovely. Now then, the actual thing itself. This one, I don't need to pull the whole thing apart. I don't need to take everything out of it. There really isn't any point. Over time, and it does take quite a lot of time, it doesn't happen quickly, but over time, your primer pan here does get stuff in it. Depending on what fuel you're using to light it, you might get certain types of scale left behind. You know, most fuels, particularly those that do evaporate, but even your oil-based fuels, when they burn, they can have a dry residue that is left behind. Not a lot, but over time it builds up, and that's pretty much what we've got down here. Also, there can be carbon in there from sometimes when it does do that thing where you get a bit of the fuel come out of that valve up there and leaks into your flash pan. It's not a musket, you know what I mean, priming pan. By and by, all of that, any carboning or any dirt in there has a nasty habit of making your priming flame burn a little dirty and smoke a little bit, which isn't just unpleasant and smells. Any smoke, anything like that, it gets into the rest of it and causes problems down the line. Like I say, this is an accumulation of years of use. This doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen the first time you light the thing, but over time it will. And these pipes up here is what you're heating up when you're priming it, basically. And you can see, dirty finger, it has carbon all over it. Perfectly natural, perfectly, you know, that's what's going to happen when you're burning stuff. But over time, that build up of carbon not only makes your priming burn less effective and makes priming take a bit longer, but also acts as a bit of a contaminant, smells a bit, causes it to smoke. So I'm going to very carefully clean all of that round there and in there. And like I said earlier, I am not giving it death here. I am literally just removing flakes, stuff like that. Lovely. Now we have all of these things, as I described earlier, as functionally clean. I don't need to make them look like they have just rolled out of the factory. I am literally just removing a load of carbon and grub off it so that it burns efficiently. And like I say, with these particular components, there's no point trying to make them shiny. They will in fact just be the same grubby colour after a couple of uses. Now, this is the jug I have the contaminated fuel in, so I'm going to give that a jolly good old blue rolling wipe out to get out any, because you can still see grit in there and weird stuff that's come out of the fuel tank. Clean that up. I don't need to clean it up right now. What I'm about to do is give this tank a good swilling out with some isopropyl alcohol. And the reason I want this clean is I'm going to tip the isopropyl back into here and see what's come out with it. And obviously if it's already contaminated with bits from earlier, I'm going to think the tank's dirtier than it is. So, don't need a whole great load of this isopropyl, to be fair, just enough to give it a swill round. The thing with cleaning products like, I mean, if you haven't seen earlier videos of mine, it's purple because it's got some methylated spirit mixed in with it. Methylated spirit's another good thing for cleaning. Isopropyl alcohol can be quite aggressive. I don't recommend you leave it sitting for a vast length of time with isopropyl alcohol inside there. There are some seals and things that can be on these that could very well be attacked and dissolved by isopropyl alcohol. So this is quite a speedy cleaning thing. I am not leaving it soaking overnight or anything like that in case it starts attacking otherwise seals. I'm not going to flood the damn thing. No need to waste the stuff by absolutely filling it to the brim, although putting enough in it so I can actually hear it's in there is probably a good idea. lid on because this stuff is terrifyingly flammable. Yeah, and you can tell it's an evaporative, the isopropyl. You can tell how quickly it evaporates because as soon as it gets on your fingers go ice cold, and that is the speed that it evaporates at and makes it cold. It's a good old wishing about. Cap off. Let's see what comes dribbling out of it. Well, that's good. For a start, it came out looking as clear as it went in. It's not come out a filthy colour. I have had that with some fuel tanks where your cleaning stuff comes out and it is absolutely grubby as you like. Shake out as much of it as I possibly can. Now I'm just going to leave that with the valve cap off for a minute. This stuff evaporates quite quickly, so if I leave it with that cover cap off, it will evaporate out quite rapidly. And yet, same again, there is a little grit in there, a lot less to be honest with you. I don't know if you can see in there, you never know what you're going to be able to see through these cameras. There is grit at the bottom of that, a little bit of. Luckily all that has sunk to the bottom and isn't floating around like detritus in the actual liquid. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run that through it again. Use a tickle of the blue roll just to, as a primitive filter, to try and just make sure we're not getting any of that grit back in it. Yeah, using the blue roll as a little bit of a filter was a good idea because we can already see grit in it, so I would have just poured that straight back into the tank then. That is actually a good point. If you're like me and the jugs that you fill these things up tend to be used for quite a few different tasks, or they just stand around in a garage for a while that can get dust and stuff in it, give your jugs a good rubbing out with some any blue roll, kitchen roll, whatever. Get the grub out of them. Don't be tipping that into your tanks. It's quite easily done as well, that is, to be fair. Right then, so that's the tank swilled out a good couple of times, and I have just been soaking the this little cap thing in a bit of alcohol for a while, just to make sure, because I'm not going to go as far as to get like a pipe cleaner and start poking out every one of those little holes, but just give it a soak in that, and that should have just dissolved any further deposits out of it. And a bit more grit did come out of the tank, so anything that comes out is good because that's stuff that's not in there, and that's what we want. Lovely. So really, we are about ready to fill it full of some nice clean fuel and give it a run. Put all these gubbins back on it now we've cleaned it up. And I shall get rid of this isopropyl. And as always, when I do tip that out, because there is the grit in the bottom of there, I'm gonna give the jug a good wiping out to make sure there's no nasties left behind that I'm gonna just then tip straight back in when I do put fuel in it. So I'll go do that. My kinky little GoPro lamp has run out of battery. I'm terrible at charging that thing, I really am. Here we have a litre of pure liquid gold. Nice, clean, fresh, uncontaminated fuel. Okay. So this can't hold a litre. I have in fact overcooked it a little bit. Tip a little back out. Same as everything with these. You don't want them overfull, really. You just get extra problems if you overfill them. We'll make sure that that air valve is open. And get rid of this highly flammable towel. We don't need that catching fire. Put the little fuel cap back on. Air valve is open. Let's get the cooking plate back on it. Then we'll get it primed up, get it lit, and see if it has stopped its bad behaviour. Now, interestingly with these, and I've said this about a lot of them, as you've seen me fiddling with them, you can get the parts for these things. You can get the little valves, you can get the replacement cooking grills if they eventually corrode through. You know, lots of places around the world still use all this sort of equipment. Fill the little primer pot up. And then we'll let it burn while it's all nice and shiny clean. Let's get rid of that. I'll tip that in one of the other lamps or something. Right, so this takes about a couple of minutes for that to burn off and get it all hot enough to do what it needs to. Right, so all the cleaning, all the priming fluid is nearly burnt off. For this light, I am using the isopropyl, which seems to burn a little yellow. It's not as clean burning as just the methylated spirits on its own, but it's kind of just what I had to hand on. I know it will light it. So I have just closed the air valve now because it's nearly burned all the primer fuel. There we go. A little yellowiness around that side and some flickers. Perfectly normal until it's warm. To be honest as well, a lot of those little flashes that are coming out, it's probably just tickles of residue in those holes there that, like I said, I didn't pipe cleaner every one of them out, so there's obviously a little dust or residue in there from where I've cleaned it. And that's running great. A few more pumps. Let it get going a little more aggressively. So that will happen sometimes when, if you've got carbon deposits in there, you will get the little bits of yellow flame until it's cleaned itself out, or until you clean it. Which it's doing rather nicely now. And it is perfectly blue flame. We don't have massive yellow flicks or anything like that, and my word, that is hot. If you are a regular watcher of Bosun Dan Bushcraft, you might recognise this stove from several other videos. I have used it on the wine making for, I think, was it the pumpkin wine? It may have been the birch sap wine as well, and that boiled everything, which when I'm doing the pumpkin wine I usually make 50 litres of that, so that's a lot of boiling that it goes through. And this thing does it all. It does it all. It gets used a heck of a lot. But there she is. Burning completely clean. All blue. It's not flashing yellow flame. It's not flicking or coughing. So as usual with these things, your main enemies are carboning up, as they are with anything that uses fuel. And contaminants getting in your fuel tank. Again, same as anything else that's using liquid fuel, gas, stuff like that. Any contamination does cause a problem. Any carboning does cause a problem. And as I've said, this isn't something that you're going to be doing and really on a weekly basis. It's very rare, really. I mean, I haven't actually done it on this one before. Usually, it just every so often gets a bit of a clean around that bit that I can't decide what I'm calling that, but where the actual gas comes out. And they're like, oh, no, it is gas. It's gas because the heat turns the kerosene into gas, into vapour. That's what's burning. That's why it's blue. So, if you're still here and still watching, thank you very much for the interest in such curious little appliances that I keep popping out. And that really is all I've got to say on the subject of the lovely Optimus number 45. A fantastic little stove. I know, yes, no, it's not really stick it in your rucksack and go hiking with sort of a stove, but there's a million and one uses for such things, particularly for anyone off-gridding it or cabin life, that sort of stuff. These things can really be a big help with that sort of stuff. But as always, guys, get out there, get bushcrafting, get having fun, be safe, get collecting useful paraffin, kerosene appliances, see what you could make out of them. And until the next one, that is all from me. It's very nice and warm. Imaginary doorway!